Happy Friday, everybody. Good morning and welcome into the Spotlight Omaha podcast, where we take you around the Omaha area, introduce you to local business owners, influential figures, and people who are making a difference in our community. We are brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. Pixel Fire Marketing is a locally owned marketing firm who specializes in website design, creating social media ads, and engaging your brand online today. If you need help with any of that, check out pixelfiremarketing.com for more details. Today, I'm joined by my friend Doug Nodgaard, the president from Equitable Bank. Thanks for being here, Doug.
Great to be here. Good morning.
Appreciate you. For somebody that's been in the banking industry for 40 years now, whether it be banking, whether it be lending, what is something that is completely different about the banking industry in 2024 than it was 40 years ago?
Probably the depth of the financial information that we ask of our borrowers or customers. You used to call them, back when I started, they would call them good old boy loans. In other words, you knew that person, they said they could pay it back, they gave you some kind of a stated income, whether it be business or personal, and you made them the loan. Most of the time it was pretty simple. They'd have some kind of a down payment, whether it be on a business, a house, a vehicle, piece of equipment. Now, you're doing more verification. Regulatory, they're scrutinizing your loans are your biggest assets in a bank. And so they're really scrutinizing those more and more every year. In our case, we're also publicly traded. We are traded over the counter. EQFN is our stock symbol. We're not, highly traded or,
Sure.
So, of course, we have our auditors that go through a certain percentage of our loan. We have bank examiners that look at a certain percentage of our loans. And of course, they're doing it to make sure that, Equitable is safe and sound. And then we have our loan committees where most banks now have loan committees for loans, say, over $250,000, $500,000. Where it's presented. So you have to have better financial information. And then we also have an internal loan review that we spot check just to make sure that the loans that we have on the books are ones that everyone believes can repay.
Yeah.
It's, more or less like a bond, it's like a security, except it's not a security. And there's been some bank failures. The most recent ones really were more balance sheet mismanagement, and also they didn't have their liquidity lined up, and so they had some large depositors that took some money out, and they didn't have very many.
Can I ask, when we talk about the way things change and how it goes from a good old boy loan to a process? Are there things that we've seen throughout history, maybe the housing boom of the 90s, the dot-com boom, et cetera, that kind of changed the way those things are done directly?
Yeah, it seems like we learn the hard way.
Sure.
You learn most from your mistakes. And so you might make a loan 15 years ago you would make today. And you would say, okay, and there's a lot of non-bank lenders too that are kind of picking up some of those good old boy loans. There's hard money lenders out there. We've seen them. We've seen some of our customers who might have a real estate project, and later on we find that they kind of got their equity through a hard money lender.
What's a hard money lender? Explain that to me.
It's probably a private individual.
Okay,
they're probably
sure.
going to charge more. They're not going to have all the disclosures to do and
Sure.
whatever. And you're signing a promissory note. They're taking a little more risk, but they're getting a higher rate.
Sure.
The same thing is true when somebody gets a credit card, and if they carry a balance, the rate's higher because it's an unsecured loan. If it's a secured loan, and I'm oversimplifying it, but if somebody has a car and they, for whatever reason, can't make the payments, they either have to,
Give the
car back, or, if they file bankruptcy or something like that, then they have to reaffirm the debt. So then they have to repay it. So it's pretty simple, but on unsecured debt, which we don't do a lot of, although we do have our own branded credit card, and we pay 1% cash back, doesn't have an annual fee. The biggest strength about our card is we do not share or sell any of our customers' data to anybody else. And that's happening a lot.
You're getting robocalls. That's why. Yeah.
Yes. And the credit reporting agencies are actually, and I just found this out maybe a year or two ago, we would be doing a mortgage for somebody, and then the credit bureau for these people, and they were getting contacted by our competitors.
Oh, wow.
And most time the customers, they're wanting to do business with us, do a mortgage. Mortgage business is pretty, if it's a standard mortgage with somebody with a 740 credit score or better, even to say a 700, the difference between one lender and another is very minuscule.
Sure.
One fee might be a little bit higher, but for the most part, the mortgage rates are pretty consistent because we're all selling. These are secondary conforming mortgages. We're all selling into the same market. So we sell to Freddie Mac and a Federal Home Loan Bank, and then the other player out there is Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are, it's kind of like tomato.
Sure.
So
probably married somewhere down the line.
they're government sponsored, agents. And in Nebraska, deed of trust, and other states, mortgages, the language is exactly the same. So it is commoditized, and of course, then it's put into pools and sold to investors, mortgage-backed securities.
I asked you what's the difference between 40 years ago. What are some of the things that are similar between now and in the 80s?
Well, for the type of lending we do on the business side, we really try to know our customer and do our diligence on our customer. And so if somebody just drops out of the sky, generally that's not going to be a loan that, we're likely to do. That doesn't mean we won't if the repayment ability is there and everything. But normally we get our business from, accountants and attorneys and existing customers, relatives of the existing customers. Maybe they started out with us in high school. As an example, we sponsor the Elkhorn North Legion baseball team.
Yeah.
And they've done quite well. And I've been to the parents' meetings, and we've been very pleased that a lot of the parents and some of the kids have come on, open up accounts with us. So maybe they get a small credit card with us, and we can see, where they're getting their income and how they're getting their income. And so I might make a few phone calls, probably 25 years ago. So I really haven't changed the way I've done things. Mm-hmm. I had an endodontist want to leave the practice he was in and start his own practice. And so I called my dentist and a couple other people, and I said, what's the demand for, endodontists and what have you? And they say, sometimes it's, 4 to 6 weeks before you can get into one. And so he had good credit. We did an SBA loan for him, and then I was able to ask a few of my dentists if they knew of this person, and they did. And the firm that he was with, the practice he was with. And so he did really, really well, and he worked really hard. He's still doing very, very well today. So I'll do those kinds of calls. I look at the long-term demand for their product or service. Yeah. Now that's getting trickier because there's a term out there that I've heard some people use. So I didn't come up with this term, but it's called being Amazoned. And retailers, there's several retailers that have been Amazon. We were just talking today, I was talking to my credit analyst. Who would have ever thought Sears would not? Business. And you could buy house kits from them. You got all your tools from them. They had car service centers back when the Crossroads was first, they had a big. I know my parents, took their car there every once
The
in a while.
brand was on the national championship trophy.
Yeah, and Chicago, the Sears building and whatever,
Yeah.
and they're gone. J.C. Penney's gone. Montgomery Ward's is gone. Retail is very difficult. Now what we're seeing is more service businesses. So one service
Like
business,
a plumber. Okay.
chiropractors, and in
Deck
my
builders.
building, I'll give, if it's okay. I mean, I have the stretch lab, and
Yeah.
I actually. I go there once a week and I get
They're great.
stretched for 25, and it's really helped my golf game.
Nice.
It's almost like going to the chiropractor, but your back isn't cracking.
Where's the stretch lab in there?
The stretch lab is
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking.
This
I was
is the
thinking
Elkhorn
Old Mill.
location.
So yeah, I'm sorry.
this
yeah.
is our 201st and Pacific location in Elkhorn, and then we have a designer. And I picked that site. The demographics are really, really good from an average adjusted gross income standpoint. So there's a lot of discretionary income out in Elkhorn and West Omaha. So there's spas out there. There's day spas out there. There's Let It Fly
Just
took
opened
over
up.
Barrel and
Yeah.
Vine, and I didn't seem to think Barrel and Vine was doing that bad. I'd go to lunch there every once in a while or whatever. And
Shout out to Coach Miller and those guys.
Yeah. So that one I thought was a pretty good location for what they were doing. There's a UPS store out there. Conveniences.
I want to get into the locations in a minute. We're catching up with Doug Nodgaard from the president of Equitable Bank here on the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. You've used the word that's associated with a telephone about 5 times in the 12 minutes we've been talking here. And anybody that's heard your guys' commercials on the radio or wherever knows that it's really personal for you specifically that you answer the phone on the first ring.
Yes.
At Equitable Bank. Where does that passion come from?
The banks that I was at previously, probably the bank I learned the most from it. When I started, it was called Douglas County Bank.
Sure.
And then about 4 or 5 years after I was there, the owners in their holding company, right when I started, bought the Bank of Bellevue. And so it was really hard to say Douglas County and Sarpy County and Bank of Bellevue in Omaha. And there's little rivalries or whatever.
Sure.
You look at Nebraska Furniture Mart, they're branding NFM, and when they're in Texas and when they're in Kansas, instead of the Nebraska Furniture Mart, it's NFM. And that's smart.
Removes that connotation. Yeah, absolutely.
And over time, everyone just maybe says in Omaha the Mart, but our president there, Art Bircher, and he's a really good banker. I learned a lot from him. He said the customer signs your paycheck. And then I've been to a lot of conferences, not very far away places necessarily, but, people and things have always resonated with me. If you take care of the customer, everything else will take care of itself. And I emphasize to our employees, MMFI, when a customer comes in, make me feel important. You're greeting them, you're standing, you're offering a handshake. Sometimes if you have a good enough relationship with them, where it's friend and business, it might even be a hug. And, we have candy out. Kids love to come in.
I steal a piece every time. By
And, so those are things, and you have to have people there. We did get a customer from another bank here. Their remote deposit capture machine, which is the check scanner, it broke down, and they said, well, you're going to have to pay us $500 for a new one. He's like, well, you're doing we're doing your tellering work for you by scanning the checks. Now there is a little bit of fraud risk, but everybody that has those, we're comfortable with them, right?
Sure.
We're not just going to let anybody do that. But then they said, well, just come in.
Has that become a newer thing in banking?
It's
I feel like that's something that's kind of been pushed a little bit more lately.
It's been around for about 15 years.
Sure.
And one of my previous banks, I was at 11 years and learned a lot there, and it was a really good bank, still is. They had a mobile deposit, so they would actually come and pick up checks. So you had a bank bag, it was locked. Some customers even put a little bit of cash in there. We didn't encourage it, but
Sure.
so then when the remote deposit capture came out, and most, again, service businesses, your deposits are either credit card, merchant deposits, or their checks.
Right.
Cash is getting less and less, although there's still a place for it. But so I did have a little debate with my boss. He goes, "Hey, we need to move everybody to this remote deposit capture." And I'm like, "Okay." And then the fee for it was like, $30 a month, and then they had to buy the machine. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure they're going to want to do that when they're getting it for free right now."
Right.
and that bank didn't have a lot of branches. And so branch traffic is down too. So remote deposit capture, a lot of our bigger customers that get a lot of checks, maybe they're in real estate and those kinds of things, they're using it, or they're coming through the drive-through. But this customer, they said, "Well, just come through our drive-through if you don't want to pay the $500. Well, they had one teller, and he said a lot of times it would take him 40 to 45 minutes. There'd be, he'd be 3 or 4 deep in the drive-through because they didn't have enough employees. And so we've gone the opposite way. Right when I left the bank, I had 3 people that could either answer the phone, and that's just in Elkhorn. Mm-hmm. And in our old mill location, 108th and Dodge, right by the Charles Schwab building. And we have 3 people that could wait on a deposit customer at once. And at that time, we didn't have anybody in front of us. So there is an expense to have a teller in front of you or whatever, but
it's worth it if it's needed.
We think so. And we're obviously the customers that we have, we want them, to be profitable ones and what have you. But you got to have the customers. That's how we differentiate ourselves, because we don't have 6,000 ATMs.
Sure.
We've got 2 in Omaha. Mm-hmm. And we've got, I think, 4 in Grand Island. Our headquarters are actually in Grand Island, and we have 1 in North Platte. We have 1 branch in North Platte, 2 branches in Grand Island, physical, teller lines, and then we have 2 here in Omaha. So we've grown in Omaha. I know our assets are not quite 20 times as much as they were 11 years ago when I started. And our deposits are up about an equal amount.
Wow.
As far as a percentage goes. So, Equitable didn't get to Omaha until 2005. The bank itself has been around since 1882. And, we're not as big, let's say, as an Access Bank, and they started in 2007. So they've really grown and grown fast, and they've done some good things. They've got some good bankers. And
is it a benefit to stay that small, though? Like, I feel like when you see, usually anytime somebody fails, it's they expand too quickly, too fast, and then the collapse happens. Is that kind of the reason behind keeping it the way you guys have?
Our growth is all organic. Mm-hmm. Now, some banks have grown via acquisition.
Sure.
I worked for First Tier back in the mid to late 80s. And so that has become U.S. Bank. Mm-hmm. And then U.S. Bank really was First Bank out of Minneapolis. And then they bought First West Side Bank in Omaha, and they bought Southwest Bank, and then they bought First Tier. And I'm trying to think what the order was, but not important. But
sure.
Right now,
those dominoes fell in that order some way, yeah.
Right now, honestly, there's not a lot of mergers and acquisition in banking because the Fed raised the interest rates so fast and so high. Most banks weren't able to adjust on the fly. I don't think any of us did. And that's really what contributed a little bit to those bank failures there, is that they went out and they bought some treasuries that were 5 or 7 year maturities just to get 1%.
Well, I want to ask about that, because you mentioned it. We've had, I think in the last 3 weeks, we've had 2 real estate agents, one insurance broker, and one financial advisor, and they keep talking about the Fed rates, the rates, and it kind of feels like everybody's feeling it across the board. How much does the housing market really determine the banking industry?
Well, what's interesting is sometimes when short-term rates go up, long-term rates will go down. The Fed is pretty consistent. You may not agree with them, but they're pretty consistent. They're concerned with inflation and employment. And so employment, as we all know, and anybody's out there trying to hire somebody, the labor market is pretty tight. It has loosened up quite a bit in my mind. At least it has in the banking side in the last 6 months. But I mean, it's not like we have rampant unemployment either, right?
Sure.
The numbers are still really good. And then the inflation.
We're seeing mass layoffs, but people are bouncing back. Yeah.
Right. They say that their target rate is 2%. And when I say they say, I think they believe that. I'm not sure they can get to 2%. That's my own personal opinion. Right now, it's running around 3%. Inflation is now. A year ago, it was 8, 9%, and so they're trying to bring down inflation while also not putting us into a recession. Now, the Fed lowering rates is a tool to stimulate economic activity.
Yeah.
So the best example I can give you of that is when COVID hit, the Federal Reserve lowered their rate in March of 2020. Their first, they did 0.5%. And then 2 weeks later, they had a special meeting and they lowered it 1%. And I can remember COVID.
Which is almost historic.
Really, and some people are going to say today, yeah, I told you, this, that, and the other thing about the vaccine and the seriousness of it. But, I thought the economy could completely collapse.
A lot of people
And
do.
my investment in the bank, which I'm a fairly significant part owner, wouldn't have been
Not
too
been
good.
well, yeah.
And so, no one really knew how this all was going to play out.
Your knee-jerk reaction when the stimulus check incentive got put out there? From a business standpoint,
from the PPP loans, I thought particularly the first round was very necessary to settle everybody down and say, hey, we're going to artificially stimulate the economy to keep it going and then every state was different.
Yeah.
Michigan, as an example, and again, hindsight's 2020, right? But their governor really clamped down on eating establishments and taverns and things like that. And a lot of them went out of business and never came back.
Sure.
I've got a fraternity brother who lives in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, and we generally go up there every winter. And there's where you cross right on Lake Michigan, there's Menominee, Marinette, Wisconsin, and Menominee, Michigan.
Yeah.
And it's a little river, not nothing like
not the Missouri.
Not the Missouri, it's maybe this river at that point, I don't know, it might be 50, 60 yards wide.
Sure.
And it was like night and day. And they wouldn't,
you do know most people don't go to Michigan in the wintertime, right?
Actually, it's really beautiful up there, and
Take your word.
snowmobiling
I'll take your word for it.
that kind of thing. So we make our own fun. And, but anyway, from a business standpoint, no, I was happy. We did PPP loans. There was actually one bank I can think of that was a community bank, didn't participate at all. And I'm not going to
please don't
disparage my competitors out there, because the management of that it pretty much turned over anyway. A lot of the larger banks tried to automate it and it didn't work.
Oh, okay.
And so consequently, honestly, PPP
you helped for my friends
from a market share, we gained a lot of market share. Some of the larger banks, their customers, and we were so concerned on getting I thought they would run out of money very quickly. So I can even remember the dates. So April 4th was a Friday, and April 3rd, we had all our applications done and signed, and we were ready to submit those. And we did it one by one. And there's a portal, almost like you're applying for an online application, but we had all their payroll information. We had everything. And the night before, actually at 10 o'clock, we all worked till 10 o'clock. And one of our guys went out and we had a couple of beers to celebrate that, hey, we got everything done. We worked hard that day. And in the morning, one of my customers texted me and he said, they changed the form last night at 11 o'clock.
Oh,
and
no.
I was amazed. I said, no, I didn't know that. He says, what time? And I get I'm not getting to the office at 6 now because my wife's foot surgery. I'm having to get her going for the day, so I'm not getting her until 7. But I'll be there at 6. He says, I'll be there waiting. So he was there waiting with 24 donuts, and he had his new, because they were worried that no one could come in. They had a medical practice.
Sure.
That no one would come in, because again,
the fear was
even
in
Omaha, that there were you weren't supposed to, and like dentists could open for emergency care and palatable care, pain relief, that kind of thing. But, we were trying to stop the spread, right? Yeah. So reduce contacts and what have you. So anyway, it was like a MASH unit that day, triage. We called all our customers and they were coming in, and I was calling everybody because he texted me at 5 a.m. and I said, get there as early as you can. We got a big day ahead of us. And so that was on Friday, the first day you could submit them. And we actually even thought, well, can you submit them at 12:01 a.m.?
Right.
And so our people in Grand Island is where the portal was. We had an SBA portal. They tried, nope. So we started submitting, I think it opened right at 6 o'clock. And we had other people that were panicking because their banks weren't calling them back or what have you. And I said, hey, we got to take care of our existing customers. Then we'll look at that. And I said, and if you were one of our existing customers, we'd take care of you first as well. Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, every application we had was submitted and had an SBA loan number. And after that, there was no personal guarantees or security or whatever. Sure. There was just, you had the payroll. If it was an individual, I'm trying to think what the number was. Was it 9,000 or some kind of number, or 19,000? I can't remember.
Sure.
And but we had them, and then we gained some really good customers through that because we answered the phone. Everyone was panicking.
Yeah.
And then the larger banks, like I said, they were trying to, and I'm not blaming them for automating it. They probably should have just said the automation isn't working. Let's
pivot.
Let's get in and start doing them. And then some companies got shamed, like Shake Shack as an example. And this isn't. That was in the news.
You hold your tongue. I love Shake Shack.
I know, but they were shamed, and quite frankly, they had every right to those PP because it was designed to keep people employed and working so they could make their mortgage payments, their credit card payments, their car payments. And some of the businesses that did better, like pizza places. I mean, we got a pizza place, and
DoorDash just went.
And I know they do a lot of. I hear they're advertising a lot, and they did better. But what happened is when the dust settled, because it wasn't as bad as we thought, is that most of the businesses did just as well that year as they did the year before. Maybe not quite as well, depending on what
some
the
did even better.
Yes, and it ended up being a tax-free grant, and because of that, all that money is out there in the economy still. We look at the College World Series. We look at when we had the swim trials. We look at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting. That reverberates through the economy.
Absolutely.
So it goes to the hotel and the restaurant, and they have their people they're employing, and those people are going
creates
out.
Jobs.
They're going out for a sandwich after work or before work. They're buying groceries. They're buying gas, and it really I do really believe in supply side economics, and that's really what that was. And that's probably why we have the inflation that we have today, because there was so much money out there. And then when we kind of felt maybe COVID was over, everybody wanted to travel. Everyone had cabin fever. I got to get out of here.
Right.
Or even some that didn't go to restaurants that much or movies or whatever. I mean, Tom Cruise probably saved the movie industry with Top Gun Maverick. That kind of, they weren't making very many movies. I mean,
specifically for theater movies. Yeah.
Yeah. So it actually had, some positive effects. That wasn't what everybody thought beginning, and no one knew really what was going to happen. And so I'm glad that it's turned out the way. Omaha's economy has always been probably more stable than most. We don't get a lot of booms, but if you don't get the booms, you don't get the busts either.
True.
And that goes for our, our real estate, our home values and things. The biggest concern I have right now is people that are trying to buy their first house. It's very, very difficult because
yes, it is.
That price range of house, people are getting into fist fights over homes, from say 100. I don't know if you can find one for 100. Let's say 150 to 400,000, and those are starter homes now. And I remember 1986, our starter home cost $62,950, and the interest rate for a mortgage at that time, and it came down, was 9.5%, wow. And we had to pay 2 discount points. Now we refinanced it a couple, 3 times since then, and so that's what. If anybody's out there and they really want to get another house and they find something that they like, I do believe the rates are going to go down. I can't necessarily tell you when,
right?
But then you can refinancing really makes sense. I mean, the house I'm in now, I started out at 4.25%, and I thought, oh, that's a pretty darn good rate.
Sure.
Then it went down to 3.5%. I go, well, it'll never get lower than 3.5%. Then I went down to 2.875,
which is what we got our house at. Yeah.
And I said, it'll never get lower than that. And then I don't know why. I said, well, Joe, what's a 15-year? 2 1/8. Wow. And so I just said, I shouldn't be having a 30-year mortgage anyway at my age, being old man Doug, So anyway, yeah, that's so the rates. Do I think they're going to come down to that level again? I really, really don't. But I think if we got 5% mortgage money, even 5 to 6%, I think that would stimulate a lot. And we actually did a lot of loans. We call them portfolio loans because the long-term fixed rates were so high, and we actually had a little better rate than that. They were only fixed for 5 years. So our customers were like, they had 2 options. They could go to the higher rate 30-year fixed, which, over 7, 8%.
Who knows how long that's going to change too.
And then we offered some lower ones because we wanted, again, to service our customer. And we're thinking long-term.
Yeah. So
those loans that are those 5-year arms are likely going to refinance into 15 and 30-year mortgages. And most of our customers feel that same way. Mm-hmm. And it's not like the old adjustable rate mortgages where they could just go up and just kill you.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of bullish. I think the Fed's going to lower their rate once this year by 0.25%. I don't think they're going to do that until November. And I think because their meeting, I believe, is the 7th of November. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the election, I think, is on the
15th.
Right? No, I think it's on the 6th.
6th, okay.
They always announce the Fed meets every 6 weeks, and it's a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and then they have their press conference at 1 o'clock, and they
November
talk.
5th, Tuesday.
Is the election, yes. Election, yeah. And so the Fed is supposed to not be non-political.
Sure.
If they lowered, that would probably give some instant stimulation, but what they don't want to do is they don't want to lower the rate and then the economy just really going too fast, causing more inflation, and they have to do it again. I think they want to keep that tool in their toolbox, the Fed, and that's why I don't think they'll do it until late, but they may do nothing. I mean,
sure, that's always an
option.
I mean,
I watch CNBC every morning, and so the mortgage market follows the 10-year Treasury because most mortgages, even if it's a 30-year, are only outstanding. The old rule of thumb used to be 7 or 8 years because, again, either someone would move, they'd move up, they'd move out of town, or they'd refinance.
Right.
So most 30-year mortgages don't go 30. All the way to 30. So that's why they don't follow the 30-year Treasury rate.
We're catching up with Doug Nodgaard, the president of Equitable Bank, here on the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. I want to talk about you for a second. Husband, father, grandfather, South High School Hall of Fame member. How do you balance all of it and still be able to deliver high customer service and take care of the clients at Equitable Bank?
Well, I'm very lucky. So I had 3 40th anniversaries this year. My first one was 40 years in banking.
Okay.
and that was in early May. I started at the National Bank of Neely, which is now Pinnacle Bank. Right out of college, I went to Wayne State, and I was interested in banking. And the department head said there was no email or internet.
Sure.
And
sent a raven to your dorm room.
fax machines were the highest tech, and whatever. So I went out and interviewed and hired me during dead periods. So I graduated, I think it was Sunday, and I started on Monday.
Wow.
And so then my next milestone was, of course, I've been graduated from college 40 years, then banking 40 years, and I've been married for 40 years. Yeah. So I met my wife at Wayne, and I would say she's been the big key in that she's so stable, and just having a stable life and a great, she's, to be married to me, you got to be a really good sport, and you have to have lots of.
Say it.
She probably deserves the Purple Heart.
Sure.
She's probably been a way better wife to me than I've been a husband. Now I'm helping her with her foot right now, so I guess I am taking care of everything. I'm partially repaying 40 years, but my parents. My mother worked for Senator Roman Ruska.
Oh wow.
And, keeping your word, and South Omaha, that was a big thing. When you said you were going to do something and you did it. And if you weren't sure if you could do it, you didn't commit to it. And she said whenever he gave his word, that was it. Mm-hmm. And this would be on a bill. Somebody would say, here's this bill. And he would say, either you have my vote or I oppose it. He would listen my mother was a legal secretary, and she actually did some legal work for President Nixon at the time, before he became president. And I can't find it, but she was invited to his inauguration. Of course, he didn't end his presidency in the greatest terms, but
something happened there. I can't remember what it was.
But he, so my mother was the secretary of the Young Republicans forever, and she was very, very, and she would give you her opinion whether you liked it or not, but you knew it was her opinion, and you might try to talk her out of it, but she was right about so many things. And tying this into sports a little bit.
Sure.
Back in the day, I was whining about Osborne, and my mother goes, "Who do you think called the plays for Devaney when he was coach?" Point. And this is like in 1977 or 78 or whatever.
She saw
He's
the forest through the trees.
You'll find out someday. And of course, I think we're all glad that he had the patience, that he didn't move on, and we kept him. And of course, he went on to greatness. So
speaking of sports, Eric on Twitter says, Doug in the red shirt, Doug with the red walls behind him. Has Doug ever been stopped and been asked if he's Nebraska volleyball coach John Cook before?
Yes, I have signed autographs. The first time it ever happened was at the Single Barrel, and my wife was with us, and that's when I think she died. The lady that played the piano and had some really colorful language in her songs and that kind of thing, and I said sure, and so I signed it, and so then the next one happened when I was taking my son out for a birthday dinner, and this is his birthday is September 7th. So we were at Chard, or right on 132nd and Pacific there.
Yep.
And Julie was telling the kids about it. They're like, no way. Blah, 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 blah. So this lady comes up and taps me on the shoulder, and she says, "Do you mind? My husband's a big fan." and everybody just had this look on their face. They didn't say anything. And she got behind me, and he took the picture.
That's so funny.
And
did you tell them?
No,
you can't.
I didn't. I didn't. Well,
you got to let the gimmick run its course. Absolutely.
She didn't say, "Are you?" If she would have said, "Are you Coach Cook?" I would have said no.
Yeah.
But a lot of people.
Maybe she's just a big fan of banking.
Yeah, and so anyway, he goes, "Thanks, Coach," and I said, "Go Big Red." And the ironic part was,
you guys were just
Nebraska was playing that night a half an hour later, so we were. My kids were like, well, geez, if they're that big a fan, they would have known they were playing, and they would be listening to John Baylor.
Coach Cook gets down there really quick to Lincoln.
Yeah, and so we were gonna. My neighbor, her niece is Allie Batenhorst. It was Allie would come over, and I met her a couple times. And before I met her, though, we were gonna pull a gag on her.
Have you just walk in the room?
No, that I would go out on my deck, and she'd go, "What's Coach Cook doing over there at the Nodgaard's house?" But we did.
That's really funny.
We didn't. So actually, I think Allie Batenhorse is her cousin is getting married this weekend. Yeah.
Speaking of sports, obviously, you're one of the most famous J-skers in the entire state. I wore the blue polo today. I expect you to walk in wearing something similar. If we're talking about defending your loyalty, whether it be to Lincoln or to,
I've got a great story.
to Omaha.
I have some great stories. They're not stories because they're true. Believe it or not, my uncle Merle Hunt played for Creighton football in 1928.
Okay.
My parents were older when I was born. I was probably an oops, but hey,
there may not be a more 1928 name than Merle Hunt, by the way. But
yeah, and he retired. He's not with us now. He was a longtime dentist in Battle Creek, Nebraska.
Okay.
They actually named a park after him. He did a lot of civic things there, and my mother was very, very proud of him. And but when I was growing up, and I played basketball at South High. And back then, going to a basketball camp was a big deal. And I thank my dad. I never wanted for anything sports related. And he wanted the best for me and what have you. And I did have some decent natural ability. I generally was the tallest and the fastest player on the team, whatever sport I played. But I went to, it was either go to Joe Cipriano's basketball camps or go to Tom Apke's basketball camps. And I idolized Rick Apke.
Yeah.
44. And he, I even did my hair. He parted it in the middle. And my first recollection of Creighton basketball was Gene Harmon making a 40-foot shot to beat Houston and Elvin Hayes.
Yeah.
And, back then, I'm trying to think what that coach, Guy Lewis. He was an awesome recruiter. Probably wasn't much of a game coach.
Yeah.
Phi Slamma Jamma should have never lost any games.
Agreed.
But they had a lot of talent, and that's kind of my first recollection of Creighton basketball. Ralph Bobick, the first tall 6'7", he was a 6'7" point guard.
Right.
And then Randy Ecker, shout out to him. He started sports talk in Omaha. He and old Gary Java on Coil, I think. Yeah. And so, Gary, I remember Randy Ecker, and he played with Apke, and they had the he called it the 5 game, which was the 4 corners. North Carolina had that too before the shot clock. I poured Cokes at the J-Backer room, and it was really cool because I got to go to the game, and they paid me like $30 a game.
There you go.
And I'd get this check, and it'd come back. It'd be like $27.65. They took out Social Security, whatever. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get $30. And but I poured there, and then at halftime, I had to come back in, and I'd count my cups and go back. And of course, back in the day, I had a good friend, and his uncle ran the auditorium. I can probably say this now, but Charlie Mancuso and Brad Mancuso. And I walked in. I didn't pay for anything.
That's Gina's dad, right?
No, that's a cousin. It's a relation. Okay. It's a relation. But anyway, I remember watching Creighton play Larry. I watched Larry Bird in person 3 times, and when he was a junior, Creighton beat him both times. The first time in a tournament then for the tournament championship, and that's Rick Apke hit a shot much like Christian Leitner, and that's where the fire marshal took a vacation, and then Indiana State had these girls dancers, and I mean, I'm 17 years old at the time, 16, 17, and they called them the Bird Watchers, and they were nice
watch.
to look at, and and then of course his senior year he came, they beat Creighton,
the mustache game,
and so that was I was a pretty good basketball player. I wasn't all-state, all-metro or anything. I was a pretty good defender. I remember guarding Dave Hoppin. I remember my coach put me on him in the second half, and he says, I don't want him to touch the ball, and he got 2 defensive rebounds.
Nice.
Now, Dave was a sophomore, and he was only 6'6" at the time, and
Sure.
I was a senior. But still,
That's right.
we got the better of Benson, so that's my background. And then, of course, Nebraska football. My parents went to every home game that wasn't on TV. They didn't have season tickets, and my dad, when you would get like a T-shirt, white T-shirt to wear under a shirt, there would be a little cardboard thing in there. My dad would write with a Sharpie or something, "I need tickets." And he went down and he would never pay more than face value. Yeah. And he got into every game, and I would get to go to one game a year with them, and they would tailgate down. My sister was going to school down there too at most of the time, and they would go into the dorms, and my parents didn't make a lot, but that was their big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so that's kind of my love of Nebraska football, and they were winning. Everybody wants to follow a winner, and keep in mind Nebraska basketball back then wasn't doing. Wasn't really doing much. So
I'll ask the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. Then, who has a more successful season this year, Nebraska football or Creighton basketball?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna say Nebraska football.
Wow, okay.
And I'm gonna say that just because there's a lot of different. I love Big Calk, and I love Ashworth, and I know Jason Green is going to be a great piece. And I know, God, who am I leaving
Got
out?
The addition of Pop Isaacs into the equation.
Yeah, there's a lot
Jemiah Neal.
There's a lot of new players that are highly rated. I've heard nothing but great things about the kid from Minnesota, McAndrews.
Jackson McAndrews.
Yeah, So, but I think this is the second year. I think our quarterback situation, no matter who it's going to be, likely Raiola. And look at the guy they added. Look at the people that stayed, and look how close they were. And I know Frost said, "Oh, we're close, but
a little bit of a difference.
But there's no reason that Nebraska football can't be a 9-10 win seat every year. Now, it's more difficult to recruit, and I get that. And it's hard to compete with the Southern teams. And there's only one.
It's hard to argue that it's more difficult to recruit when you're landing 5-star quarterbacks, though.
Well, that's and maybe that attracts more. And I think the one thing that I think rules very good on selling is like, hey, you're going to play in the NFL. You're going to play in Green Bay.
Yeah.
You're going to play where else? And
Chicago.
You're going to play in Cleveland, Chicago, and you're going to have to learn to throw and kick in the elements. And Big Ten football puts probably just as many draft picks out there as the SEC. Now they may be more on the line and the offensive line, and probably the greatest quarterback of all time, at least maybe until Mahomes is done, is probably Brady. He's from Michigan, so I think that's a good selling point. And he is just such a likable guy. And I think what Matt Rule's doing and is a little bit like what our bank is doing. They're differentiating themselves in that they're trying to take care of who they have versus the Colorado model, which I don't think works. And if you look at what's happened to Kentucky, and of course Calipari had to, I didn't say had to leave, but he left just because
he probably had to leave.
The one and done and getting a whole team of mercenaries doesn't work as well. Look at how good Creighton was when they've kept their nucleus around. Yeah. Okay, Sharman obviously had to go to the NBA. I think Alexander probably made a good decision for himself to go. And of course, who else did we lose that can't?
You got everybody else back. Oh, well, you got Farabello had to leave.
Oh, yeah. Fair. And but that San Diego State team that beat them, many Christmas, those guys were probably grandparents.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
so a good 4-year senior a lot of times is better than a a 5-star freshman because they haven't learned how to play the physicality that college
They don't know what they don't know yet.
AAU is, I mean, it's preparing them somewhat, but the being old and staying old, and I think McDermott's got a really good formula. So they might be better next year. Now, would it surprise me? No. I mean, look what Connecticut did this year. I did not see Connecticut doing what they did this year, but you got people like, I can't stand Dan Hurley, but that Caravan, I mean, I would kill to have him on my team. He's probably a more skilled Grant Gibbs.
Yeah. And unfortunately is back.
yeah, I know. I was like, oh yeah, he's going, so, and he was able to put that chemistry and Mac is a great coach and he's a great guy. And so is Rule, and Rule's a great guy. So I think players, I think if you put the truth serum in Nembhard and Kaluma, they would say they regretted leaving. I
think Kaluma, I think Nembhard for sure. I don't know about Kaluma.
Yeah. Well, I heard rumors that maybe Arizona had a big package for him that didn't necessarily come. They didn't keep their word, or whoever gave, and then. But by that time, Mac had secured Ashworth, and I think he said, "Hey, this." When you bring players into, I think you have to somewhat promise them a role or whatever.
Especially in today's day.
And that's why, but then you look at a guy like Danny Kalin, hats off to that kid.
Yeah.
Sticking, coming in, competing. And, all the weird injuries that we had last year, we could have maybe thought about a fourth string quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, Jeff Sims didn't work out, and hindsight's 2020, and he just lost his confidence.
Heinrich got hurt.
Yeah, and you could see it, and I feel bad for him. He was a nice kid. He did everything. I mean, now granted, did I cuss when he threw an interception or something? Absolutely, or whatever.
Sure.
And I was at the Minnesota game. I mean,
that's right.
And it was just amazing, and how we lost that game, but.
You'd say that about a lot of games over the last 10 years.
I just don't think we're going to lose those games this year.
I don't either.
I don't think we're going to give the other teams games. I mean, and that's been Iowa's strategy. Now, granted, Iowa's probably never going to get. I know the Iowa fans are going to argue with me. They're never going to. But they were the worst. What was it, 10 or 11 win team last year I've ever seen, but they just let everybody self-destruct, and that. I'm not saying they were smart in doing that. That's the way they won games. But I think that
they're a college football version of the rope-a-dope.
I think Rule's got to just not lose games, or players that lose games and make dumb penalties and bad decisions. They're not going to play, and they know it, and he knows it. And I think that's going to reflect in their. So I think they have a really good chance to win 9 games. And so the college basketball equivalent of 9 games to me is probably Elite 8, maybe Sweet 16. But if you draw the right matchups, Creighton could.
It matters. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've had Final Four caliber teams before, last year and the year before and the year before that included, but
especially that Zagorowski
injury
team too.
They weren't going anywhere without Zagorowski and of course that was COVID. And then I remember we were losing to St. John's, and at halftime the season was canceled.
Right.
And I still remember that.
We usually try to cut this at a half hour. I knew my audience today, so I planned to go longer. We're hitting about the 53-minute mark, so I want to tie it back to Equitable real quick. Is there anything about Equitable Bank that people should know about that we didn't hit on today?
Well, I think we have the best of both worlds. We talk about answering the phone, and that's kind of, to some people, old school or whatever. But we do have a really good digital banking platform.
Agreed.
And we use Jack Henry. And there's another large community bank in Omaha that uses them. They're probably stronger when you get east of Fiserv is, the other client. And they kind of started out in Lincoln. They really started in Lincoln, and of course Fiserv bought them. Fiserv bought First Data, so it's kind of and they have all these different technologies. But we have chat features, and if you get stuck or you get locked out or whatever, you can call. you can make your deposits on the phone. We have a thing called auto books, and that might be something you might want to use at some point. And I can kind of show you how to do that, where you can send an invoice to a customer, they can pay, and you can pass on the discount fee to them, even a credit card fee. You see that a lot if you have kids, but like my grandkids will Heart Association or something for the Millard schools. And I'll give $50 and they'll say, do you want to get the whole $50 so you pay the merchant fee from the credit card? And so that's an interesting. So we think we match up. Do we have a pie chart? Do you get a report at the end of the year and said you spent 20% of your income on DoorDash and entertainment or something? Yeah. There's other things you can use for that, Mint and what have you. But really, banks all generally have the same products and services. We just think our service and our delivery is better. And if you run into a snafu, I have people that will call me on my cell phone on a Saturday afternoon, then their debit card isn't working. And occasionally I can get a hold of I'm not promising this all the time, but our chief operating officer, and he can go in and he takes his computer home with him every night, and he can sometimes remotely unlock a debit card or something, or they put the wrong number in on the back, the CVC code. That happens more than you think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. My good friend John Cook joined us today on the Spotlight Omaha podcast. That is Doug Nodgaard, the president of Equitable Bank. His website is scrolling across the bottom of the screen. If you want to upgrade your financial institution, or maybe you have a business account that needs a little more personal touch, check out equitableonline.com today. Buddy, I appreciate you doing this. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks, Jimmy.
This has been the Spotlight Omaha podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing. We'll be back on Monday at 11.